Welcome to the A Minute to Midnight show, folks. This is Tony coming to you from New Zealand, and with me today I have a frequent guest on the show, John Haller, who is in Ohio, and it's always interesting to hear what John has to say as he researches things very, very well. So welcome, John.
Hi, Tony. Good to be with you again.
And it's crazy times, John. It seems to just get crazier and crazier, and every time we talk, things have moved so much and in a bad direction.
They don't seem to be returning to any semblance of normal. When I did my update this week, I sort of jokingly say that I'm bringing in guest updaters to talk about the crazy situation in the world and how disjointed everything is and what's going on. And so I've jokingly, a number of times I've said that Antonio Guterres, when he issues a statement, he'll be our guest updater today. And of course, he was busy last week. He was to say, we got to get the UN, we got to get everybody on board. We've got to use this coronavirus thing to bring in the new world order. Everybody, as you know, I'm sure you've done some shows on it, talking about the Great Reset that the World Economic Forum is pushing. Yesterday, I titled my prophecy update that it's not forget the Great Reset, it's the Great Unraveling. Because it does seem that everything is coming apart. Nothing is the same that it was 6 months ago. I don't think we're ever going back to that. When I look at things, and we could talk a little bit more about this, economic, political, geopolitical, I don't see anything returning to any type of sense of normal. And there are competing narratives of everything now. We have, the Black Lives Matter and Antifa demonstrations, riots, takeovers of some parts of the city. We have the cancel culture. Everything is it's insane. I mean, when I try to keep my updates each week to about an hour and a half, and it's increasingly difficult because I could just stand up there with my phone and say, okay, what's going on? What's happened in the last half hour? And I could talk for 2 or 3 hours, it seems like, every Sunday. So maybe we could just start with looking at the political situation in the United States, what's going on there, because I think there's going to be massive changes at every level of government as we come, because of people's reaction to the shutdowns related to the coronavirus, and then, of course, the protests and that type of thing. It's really reached a stage where we live in different universes. Let me give you an example. Now, look, people can accuse me of being someone who's had the benefits of white privilege. I've had a 40-year career as a lawyer. My view of white privilege is I used to get up and go to the office at 3 a.m. in the morning. I would work a 10, 12, 20-hour day, sometimes 23 hours. I don't feel like I really got any benefits because of my race. Now, that's arguable, but I worked hard. I'm very concerned with the way the whole Black Lives Matter thing is going. Particularly, there was a good article at Real Clear Politics yesterday by a guy named Harlan Hill. You might want to look it up. And he was talking about what's happening with cancel culture. So you have all these people are losing their jobs over this. The founder of CrossFit, which is a multi-billion-dollar company, had to resign because he didn't come out in full support of the Black Lives Matter agenda. So they terminated him. He was the founder of the company, and he was out. There was a professor at UCLA who was terminated because he would not give extra credit to people who were minority students who were upset by what happened with George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter thing. Here locally in Columbus, the mayor has essentially, as best as I can tell, and I kind of use some sources that people that I know that are associated with the Columbus Police Department, where most of the protests have taken place, he's essentially issued a stand down order. so that when they go out and they do these protests, the police really don't do anything. I mean, I work right in the center of Columbus. My office window looks right down on the center of the Capitol Rotunda for the state of Ohio. You cannot even go in the front door of our building. It's a 40-story office building. You have to go around the back through the parking garage. You have to go in through the back door, essentially. You cannot enter the front door because they've erected a plywood wall, which of course now is filled with Black Lives Matter and Antifa graffiti. They have regular protests across the street. There have been days when they've been shutting down our building early. So even though people were starting to emerge from the coronavirus lockdowns and shutdowns, then along come these riots to keep everybody back inside. And so it looks to me clearly that this is a planned response, that everybody was, whether the Floyd thing was planned or not, I'm officially agnostic on that. But I do know that once that thing came about, everybody was ready to jump on it, just like everybody was ready to jump on the coronavirus problem, issue, whatever it is, and take advantage of it. So so as soon as you know from our prior conversations, as soon as the coronavirus shutdown occurred, all of a sudden there emerges this World Economic Forum website that's completely populated with all of this information about, global governance and all of these sorts of things. And then just a week or so ago, the World Economic Forum came out with they added yet another thing to their strategic intelligence website, weforum.org/strategic intelligence. They added a whole section on the global reset. So it's clear that people have been planning for quite a long time to take advantage of these type of situations. Never let a crisis go to waste. So here in Ohio, we have a Republican-controlled state government. Now, largely conservative. Usually, there's enough political power seated within the Republicans, and the number of people that are Republicans in the state Senate, the number of Republicans in the state House, and then a Republican governor, that the Republicans can pretty much get through almost any legislation that they want. Now, that was not true under the prior governor, John Kasich, who claimed to be a Republican, seemed to be a Republican, used to be my congressman, but he kind of went, to say he went squishy on things is an understatement. So even when there were things done to kind of limit abortions in Ohio that were passing the Ohio State Senate and Ohio State House, they were pocket vetoed or directly vetoed by John Kasich. That changed when Mike DeWine came in as governor. He's a fairly conservative guy. I believe he's Catholic, pro-life. But things really, it really hasn't led to a huge change in the way things are done. Local governments in the cities and the larger cities in Ohio are pretty much controlled by Democrats. I know that the Democratic mayor here in the city of Columbus has essentially issued a stand-down order when these riots take place, and they've done a lot of damage. It's a very strange dystopian world. I go down to the office occasionally, and I go in the parking garage, and there's 10 cars on the lower level of the parking garage. And this is a 6 or 7 story parking garage for a 40-story building, and there's nobody there. And you go in, there's hardly anybody coming into the office, even a month after everything was started to be relaxed. And because now you drive up and down the street, High Street, which is the main north-south thoroughfare in Columbus, and everything's boarded up. I mean, for probably a mile south of where I am to a mile north of where I am, even further, and then some of the side streets of, lower level apartment buildings, they've either been broken out or the people have boarded them up as a defensive measure. So it's just sort of a crazy, chaotic, dystopian world. It just doesn't. This is the summer when everybody's usually out and about and active, but you drive by, there's a well-known local restaurant chain. I don't think they'll ever open again. They have 5 or 6 locations around Columbus. They were never open for takeout. I think they were struggling a bit. So it's a strange world that we live in. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around, and it's not. I don't think it's ever going to back to what it was like in January. Back in January, I was planning on a number of trips to speak at some conferences and that sort of thing, and here we are a few months later, and nothing.
Yeah, it's definitely crazy, all right, what's going on. And all these stand-down orders, you'd never would have believed that if 6 months ago someone had said the police would be told to stand down when riots are happening all across the nation and allowing people to erect their own country in a city like Seattle and doing nothing about it and this type of thing. You never would have believed it possible. I mean, it just would have seemed insane. And yet that's what is happening. And then you get, on top of that, you get this now big scare tactic going on about more coronavirus. They let these riots happen partly to probably hope that the coronavirus would spread so that then they can have more excuses to tell everyone we've got to be afraid of it. So, stay afraid until the vaccine that Bill Gates is promising us comes out and then we'll save you type of thing. Meanwhile, they don't stop riots. They don't stop these Antifa and people like that from protesting and rioting and doing damage. And they are telling everyone, this next wave of the coronavirus is coming. We need to be terribly afraid of it. When you look at the actual death numbers, they're going down. I've looked at them again today. The number of deaths in the US per day is way, way down from what it was. And yet they're hyping up this fear of it, that it's spreading and some states are worse and worse and, look out kind of thing. It's just control. It's fear and control tactics 101.
Yeah. The examples are legion. I was listening to a video. I don't remember who it was the other day, yesterday. And it was just like, he was just ticking off one thing after another about, Qantas in Australia is laying off 6,000 employees. BMW is laying off 6,000. Rolls-Royce, which makes jet engines for aircrafts, they've laid off tens of thousands, I think 20,000 people in England and elsewhere around the world. And it's just one thing after another. Disneyland was supposed to open next week for its 65th anniversary. They're not opening. Disney World still says they're going to open in July, but now they're talking about the spike in Florida, and who knows whether it's real or not, or something to fear. The fact of the matter is that it just seems like it's a constant wave of them putting in place these restrictions, and a lot of it is done without any regard, frankly, for the economic effect of what's going on. It just doesn't seem to end, and I don't see any end in sight. I personally am of the view that this coronavirus thing is a real thing. I think it's an issue in some limited circumstances. But the interesting thing is, we're all concerned about this vaccine and that type of thing, and that information is hard to find now. There's hardly anybody really talking about, at least that's on the vaccine development side, talking much publicly about what's going on and what they're doing, which is concerning. And so I think it makes it difficult for those of us who have concerns about vaccines and are concerns about how all of this stuff plays into Bible prophecy. It's hard to find the information. We just can't find it. But the immediate impact is what's going to happen with the U.S. presidential election and the control of the House and Senate. I think there's a narrative out there, Tony, especially on the QAnon side. I know we've talked about it in the past, on the left, they want to build a utopia. On the right, they want to build a utopia. And I think both of those efforts are ultimately doomed to failure, because we know that the only way this really thing gets cleaned up ultimately is when Jesus returns and sets up his kingdom. But I have concerns about the push on both sides of this issue to create this sort of utopia. So there's a lot of people, we got to get the Republicans elected. We got to get the Republicans elected. And a lot of people have put a lot of time and effort into that. But then what did we have today? We have a court that's really controlled by the Supreme Court that's now controlled by Republican appointees. And it went at 5-4 decision. Chief Justice John Roberts, voting with the majority, struck down some laws in Louisiana that have tried to put some restrictions on abortion. Specifically, the law in Louisiana this time was requiring physicians that do abortions to have admitting privileges to hospitals close to the abortion clinic. So that was challenged a few years ago in Texas and struck down, was challenged again. And this has been sort of the whole goal of the pro-life movement in the U.S. has been to try to attack abortion incrementally. So they come up with these laws. You have, conservative legislatures in some states that put in place these laws, and then they go to federal court and they end up in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court strikes the law down. So it's pretty clear at this point that absent a complete, total revival in America that would allow a constitutional amendment to come in place to stop abortion, that it's not going. I just don't see it happening. There might be some restrictions that come in, but certainly with the way the Supreme Court is constituted now, you're not going to have it happen. John Roberts is totally unreliable. He's really not a conservative. He's really a Washington guy. So that's the way it is. You're not going to get anything out of John Roberts, and you're not going to get anything out of this court. And then just, a week ago, Neil Gorsuch, the most recent appointee to this, next to most recent appointee to the Supreme Court, unusual in the fact that he's, one of the 8 on this, of 9 justices on the Supreme Court. I think we now have 4 Roman Catholics and 4 Jewish people, and now 1 Episcopalian who went to a Jesuit school growing up. So I guess he's sort of Catholic in his orientation. But, they came out with this ridiculous ruling that said that when the U.S. Congress enacted the laws against discrimination on the basis of sex in 1964, that really should be interpreted to mean sexual orientation and sexual, whether you're transgender or not, or whatever you think you are, whatever you think you feel you are. And if you're discriminated against on that basis, then you can bring a lawsuit against the people that do this to you. That has a huge impact on the church. I think that's going to have a huge impact on how churches hire, nonprofits hire. So I'm not optimistic that look, conservatives and others have fought against putting that within the Civil Rights Act for 55 years now, and 56 years, and they've been successful in keeping that out of it. It's always possible that a Democratic-controlled legislature and Senate and president could pass that stuff if they wanted to, but they haven't been able to for 56 years. But now they don't need to, because the Supreme Court rewrote the law. And this is, it's egregious in my view. It's just, I just don't see how it, it's hard to watch it and be optimistic that this thing would ever turn around.
Yeah. And then you look at these different cities at the moment with, defund the police calls and all that. In places like New York, I just saw a massive number of shootings over the weekend. This is just going crazy, and Chicago and other places as well. And nothing appears to be being done about it. It's just, who is actually safe anywhere, especially in these cities, big cities like that. But
it is the spirit of lawlessness.
yeah,
And look, the Bible prophesies that this is one of the major characteristics of the end times, that there will be the man of lawlessness. So when the man of lawlessness is going to rise to power, there's certainly going to be a spirit of lawlessness in the world. And so we have a tendency to kind of look at our city, our county, our local place. But Tony, even in one of the suburbs of Columbus over the weekend, they were having protests. There's a big thing circulating now that there will be protests over the 4th of July holiday weekend this weekend. I can tell you from sources that I've heard is that for the city of Columbus, and I assume this is also true for other police agencies in the cities around Columbus and towns around Columbus, that mandatory overtime and time off has been canceled because they are concerned about what might happen. And you can't do anything about it. I don't know if you saw the video on Twitter. There was a couple that lives in a very, very they have an estate in St. Louis, and the people were on their way to the mayor's office. They want the mayor to resign there because I guess she's not woke enough for them. And they went through private gates. They were cutting across the property, and this couple, they happened to be lawyers in St. Louis, came out. The wife had a handgun. The husband had a rifle and said, "Get off our land. It's private. You have no right to be here." And now there's a big push by Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and other people to have them disbarred, to cancel their life work because they tried to defend their property. And this is happening all over the place. Again, the Harlan Hill article at Real Clear Politics yesterday talked about the cancel culture. Everybody's getting fired. They're even firing people. One of the examples he used, and I can't remember the company, the husband was fired from the company, but he never said anything against this. His wife posted something on social media. So they fired him. And I think we're going to see a lot of Christians, if they stand up to this nonsense, lose jobs and that type of thing. And then, what's the church going to do about this? Now, the woke part of the church, the social justice warrior woke part of the church, they'll just capitulate to everything that's going on. And does anybody look at what Black Lives Matter really says on their webpage as to what they stand for? That they're in favor of all of the LGBTQ agenda, transgender rights, and they want to destroy the nuclear family? How is it that pastors are talking about this? Sean King, a pastor from Atlanta, he founded a church called Courageous Church, and now he's a big supporter. I think he's one of the leaders of Black Lives Matter. And he was saying any white European Jesus, we should just destroy all that and tear it down and break out the stained glass windows. And that's the surface thing as to what this guy wants to do. So my contention is that he should not be referred to as the founding pastor of that church in Atlanta, but the founding predator, because he's completely lost the plot of Christianity. But this is where we are. You see seminaries and colleges and universities capitulating to this. I don't know where it is. I really don't know where it is, but it is a concerted effort to tear down Western Judeo-Christian civilization. And it seems to be working, because who's standing up against it? If you do stand up against it, you're fired. They try to disbar you or whatever. It's from my perspective, it's chaos.
Yeah, and it really doesn't have a good look on the horizon for any of this. Just whatever thing you look at, the coronavirus, supposedly these Black Lives Matter protests and Antifa and all of that, the civil unrest. You can only see it getting worse in the months ahead. There's no end. You can't go, oh, well, by such and such it'll be over, because I just see it escalating and getting worse and worse. And then you mentioned the 4th of July. Well, is the bikers for Trump or whatever bunch still supposed to be going to Seattle to tear down that Chop or Chaz or whatever? And I mean, I don't know. I think the Hells Angels may have been partly involved in the setting up of that. And what are we going to have? A war between, the conservative, supposedly bikers with criminal elements mixed up in them against the left-wing criminal element Antifa, and what's going to happen with the police and so on if that goes on. It's just like you mentioned earlier, the extremes on both ends to create their sort of utopia. That's it. There's extreme at both ends, and I just don't see how this is going to end well.
Right. And the narratives, while they sort of have the same goal, they go about it in a very different way, and it creates massive conflict. I don't know. I mean, I will confess that many years ago, when I first came to Columbus, I worked for a very short time with an attorney who was shortly after I joined the firm. He left the firm and he moved to Seattle, joined the firm that was started by Bill Gates's father, Bogle and Gates, a big law firm in Seattle. Obviously big because they represented Microsoft and made a lot of money doing that. And now he's the city attorney of Seattle. So I looked up his webpage the other day, and he's like, against any kind of drug laws and that type of thing, against any of that criminalization. And I would just say, look, go to Seattle. The city, it's chaos. The city is in chaos. And I was working with a guy recently on some matters at the law firm who works for a company in Seattle or lives in Seattle, and he's buying a condo downtown. And I'm like, I wonder what his decision is like now, that he spent a couple $1 million on a condo in downtown Seattle. I mean, is that where you really want to live? So the impact that it's had, it's kind of an interesting economic impact, at least around here, is people see what's happening down in the center city, and so they're moving out to the suburbs. So when we have recently sold our home and bought another home, there's a shortage of homes, so house prices are rising in the suburbs. Even in the midst of an economic downturn, house prices in a lot of places, especially around New York and Chicago and other cities, are going up. Every weekend in Chicago, there's 100 people shot, maybe anywhere from 3 to a dozen killed. Now it's happening in New York. I hear it's happening in other cities, and it doesn't seem like the cops are doing anything. But if you were a cop, would you really want to be doing anything? That's the question.
Well, I guess the only way it could work is if there's a united effort to do something. If you're just some random cop here or there, well, you're probably just going to get killed. So there's no real positive end in sight for any of this, and especially as the economy unravels, which I believe it's going to continue to do worse and worse, not only in the US but globally in the months ahead. And of course, that's the goal of the International Monetary Fund and the Davos crowd and all of that, because as you mentioned earlier, they're looking at a great reset. So they want everything to fall apart anyway, so that they can bring their new system into play, which will still have the old puppet masters at the top, just a different system.
Well, and the other thing too is right now, at least before this reset takes place, the elites and people with money, they're buying everything because assets, have dropped in value. I see the sort of the leading company that started the oil fracking and gas fracking in the United States, which led to a big economic boom in a lot of areas. I've seen the charts where the wells are in, eastern Ohio and western Pennsylvania, and the lines that have been drill horizontal wells and that sort of thing. It's unbelievable But in that led, I know of people who are getting royalty payments of over $1 million a month. We're getting royalty payments of $1 million a month, but now all that fracking is shut down. And Chesapeake Energy, which was sort of the pioneer in this area, filed for bankruptcy yesterday. So who knows where all this is going? And so when the U.S. the politicians tout that we're energy independent, we were energy independent a few months ago. That's changed now because the price of oil is low enough that there's very little fracking and production going on in the United States. Then you look at cities like, Houston is a disaster right now. It just seems like everywhere that I look. And so how does this translate then into the presidential election here this fall? I don't know. I wouldn't predict. I wouldn't. You could give me 100-to-1 odds on either side, and I don't think I'd bet on either one of them because I don't know what's going to happen. I don't think it looks very good for President Trump right at the moment because everything that he does is opposed.
The best way to start a civil war, though, may be to take President Trump out, be it real or be it fake, with his knowledge, so that he has an accident or he gets shot or something, which may be completely faked. But you imagine if that were to happen close to the election, there would be absolute pandemonium and chaos, and that would be the best way for them to possibly step to where they want to go. So I wouldn't actually rule that out of the equation, personally. Other than that, which one of them would win if there is an election? Well, we'll have to wait and see. But an awful lot could happen that could change the whole playing field well and truly before that time.
Well, it's kind of funny because if we had talked about this stuff 6 months ago, people would have said, you guys are kind of getting off into crazy land. And right now I'm sort of the view that anything's on the table. Look, so when we look at like the spike in coronavirus cases, now it could very well be that this is just more testings being done. Does seem like the death rate is dropping. But, I'm also concerned that if this was a bioweapon, that maybe the weak bioweapon was released first to get everybody kind of in a panic, and then to see, it wasn't really all that bad. So why are we worried about it? And then the next one comes and people won't pay attention when it might be more serious. And then we have an even bigger problem. So
I totally agree with that. And that bioweapon could be released as another virus some other way, or it could be in the vaccine.
Look, again, 6 months ago, I would have said you're crazy for even thinking that. But now look at what's going on. And it's clear that there's a lot of people that want to control. I think that some of the things that they've tried to do, the contact tracing and that type of thing, I think they're having some trouble implementing it, frankly. But they're not stopped. That doesn't mean they're stopping it. They're just trying to do it better. And I'm very concerned that ultimately where this leads, for example, I think you need to watch China. I think you need to watch a couple countries in the world that I think are very, very important. And one of these is China, because China controls a lot. It has a lot of economic muscle. It's where a lot of chips and computers and that type of thing are implemented. And watch what they're doing to Hong Kong. They're essentially in violation of the agreements that they signed back in the 1990s. They're taking over Hong Kong and they're shutting it down and they're putting in the oppressive Chinese system. And this social credit thing that they have is, my concern is that there are a lot of companies that want to roll that out. Now, I think they wanted to roll that out through the contact tracing and the coronavirus tracing apps that they were developing. It doesn't seem like they've gotten a lot of traction with that, but that doesn't mean they're going to stop. They're going to continue to do it. And frankly, There's enough data that's exchanged out there every day on a daily basis about where you are or what you're doing that I don't need. Any notion that we have privacy in a lot of respects is an illusion. So someone like you who has an internet program that talks about these issues, someone like me who talks about these in a prophecy update, certainly we're on the radar. And I don't know that there's any way that we can hide, but I think that China is making a lot of moves that are very troubling. I noted on my update a couple weeks ago that China is essentially taking over the water sources that come out of the glaciers in the Himalayas. They're damming the rivers and that sort of thing, which is causing problems with drought and lack of water now in places like Thailand and Cambodia and Vietnam, which are fairly populous countries. And so China's controlling, and even into Bangladesh and some parts of India. So there's just massive potential conflict. You see the conflict that kind of bubbling up in the Himalayas there between India and China. So I would watch China. The other country, I think, and I think this plays more into things that we talk about in Bible prophecy, is Turkey. Yesterday in my update, I played a video clip of a very pro-Erdogan website and a YouTube video. And it essentially made it look like Turkey was the center of the world. And Turkey's having problems, but now we have Turkey working with Iran on some issues in the Middle East. And so years ago, I was at a dinner, a private dinner at a pastor's house, and I sat down at the table. It was just Chuck Missler and me. And I don't know if you know Chuck Missler, but Chuck was a well-known Bible prophecy teacher, and he was a friend. And so I asked him, I'm going to guess this was about 2009, 2008. Yeah, about 2009. And I said, so Chuck, this was 11 years ago, when you see these things happening in the world, because, we're talking about it back then, do you get kind of excited that we're really kind of right at the end? And he said, I do a little bit, but I would watch Turkey. I think Turkey is the key to a lot of this. So I've been watching Turkey ever since because I trusted Chuck. And as I watch Turkey, and I don't know that Erdogan is the guy. I mean, he's a tyrant. He's an oppressive dictator. And he seems to survive all of these things. And he's a big Muslim Brotherhood guy. Now he's involved in Libya. He's involved in Yemen. He's involved in Syria. And I think all of this is by design. So I do think that plays into the Bible prophecy thing. So I would pay attention to China and pay attention to Turkey, and especially how Turkey reacts to the annexation discussions that are going on in Israel. In 2 days, Israel may or may not annex parts of the Judea and Samaria, what the world calls the West Bank. There's a lot of different views in Israeli politics about how that should go. I personally think that they're going to annex a little bit or apply sovereignty to some limited areas. But what's the reaction to that going to be? There was a very interesting article in the Wall Street Journal this morning, half page on the back, and then on their website, many more maps and pictures. And essentially what they have is they have this, what Hezbollah has been doing about the green borders for peace, I think they call it. It's a Hezbollah-funded organization in Israel. And what they're doing is, of course, Israel has posts set up to watch what's going on in Lebanon. So what they have done, and this is the way that somebody like Erdogan and Hezbollah think, they think much, much more long-term than we do. We think, how's this going to affect me in the next election cycle or my poll numbers that will appear on TV this weekend? They're planning a decade or a century or 2 centuries ahead. They're planting trees along the border with Israel that so that when the trees grow, they'll block Israel's view into Lebanon. And this is a Hezbollah-funded organizations that doing that. Everybody knows this. So they're fighting a war on this, or getting ready for a war on many, many different levels. And I just think, I know that Bible prophecy says that there will be some wars in that area in the end times. And I really think that we're on sort of a hair trigger edge to see some of these things come about. I think there's going to be a conflict between Hezbollah and Israel. And well, we know there'll be a conflict between a whole bunch of them, but I think leading up to that, there's going to be some sort of conflict. Israel announced in some seminars that they did about a year ago at the Herzliya conference. I think it was a year ago, maybe it was 2 years ago. The head of the Israeli Air Force said, listen, we're not going to let happen. We're not going to have a 6-week war like we did with Lebanon back in 2006, with Hezbollah back in 2006. We are going to completely take this whole thing down in 24 to 36 to 48 hours. It will be shock and awe like you've never seen before. So I don't know. I kind of believe when they say that they're going to do that. By the same token, I believe Hezbollah, when Hezbollah says we're not going to let that happen. So I just don't see how that situation is resolved without a major conflict. And I think it may be exacerbated by the annexation decisions that are made this week. I don't know, but I think that something's going to happen, and it could happen within the next few weeks. It's very, very possible.
It's interesting because you have the division in Israel, like you have in America, like we have everywhere else. It's just a global thing that's happening. Nowhere has seemingly stability. And yeah, I just very quickly want to go back to you mentioning China, and what came to my mind was only a little thing, but a company in New Zealand that has made nappies, baby nappies since the early 70s. It's a household name here, is closing up shop because they can't compete with Chinese companies and imported nappies. And I mean, that's just one little thing, but how many bigger and wider cases are there of this type of thing where companies have closed up because they can't compete with China? So China has pretty much a monopoly on manufacturing of so many things, and that includes antibiotics and all kinds of stuff. And so they've stealthily put themselves in that position to control the world in many ways. And I know America, so much stuff also was sent over to China, and this can't bode well for these Western countries.
Well, I will remind people, you and I had a conversation, I think it was January 26th. And we talked at that time. At that time, what we saw was that there was this lockdown that was occurring in China. They were shutting down the largest industrial power in the world was shutting down. And we said at that time, I don't remember the quote, but I know certainly I don't remember what we said on air versus off air, but we were saying is people need to get ready for a major economic problem. And this was before the coronavirus lockdowns and all of this other stuff. And I saw a video, I don't know who put it out. Might have been, I don't remember, because people send me all kinds of videos. But the person he said it was clear that in late January, a world economic crash was coming. And now, as we're trying to unwind it, you have a couple things happening. You have the Fed and the elites running in and buying up everything. And it appears that there's a concerted effort to just crush small business, which in the United States, small businesses account for about 50% of the business activity. But I can tell you from, what I do as a lawyer, that the small business sector is in major, major trouble in the United States. So look, if somebody made a claim that the global elites wanted to crush small business so they could consolidate power, economic power in the hands of even fewer people, I would be, if I was on the other side of that case, I would have a hard time beating you at this point, because it certainly appears that they've done. So again, I think the advice that gave back in January was, look, get your own personal economic house in order. You need to prepare, because I don't think any of this stuff is over. I think you need to make sure you have food, water, and a place to live. Uh, you might want to have some gold and silver, but I think, in a big economic reset, I don't know what they'll do with that too. I mean, they're going to control. I don't know that we can stop it, but you can prepare yourself. But I think getting out of debt, for whatever reason, we decided to get out of debt a number of years ago. And I think it's helped us quite a bit at this point. But I just think that, I get emails, Tony, from people are saying, oh, look, they're going to do an economic reset. There's going to be a debt holiday and a debt jubilee. And then we're going to have this great thing coming out the other side. And these are conservatives that are saying this. And I'm just not thinking that it's not a utopia on the other side if these people are in charge. You know that, and I know that.
Yeah, yeah.
And it certainly appears that it's set up. It could happen, and look, this could drag on for a few years, but it could happen very, very quickly. Let me just close with this. I know we're sort of bumping up against the time. But I did cover this yesterday. I mean, we've talked about these in the past. The cover of The Economist, the world in 2016, the world in 2020, the world in 2019. I don't know if you've seen their new cover. On their new cover, they have like a family, husband, wife, and child, and a dog, and they're all sitting on a couch with gas masks on. And then they have like 7 or 8 pictures, and they sort of track maybe the seals of Revelation. They have a energy release from the sun. They have a nuclear explosion. They have birds like falling out of the sky. And so there's like 7 or 8 of them. And it's sort of like this is what the elites view as they're like getting prepared for the next catastrophe. So they've given us like 8 options that they think: collapse of the biodiversity, which is happening everywhere. Species dying off, bugs growing like crazy in some places. And so just look at the cover of the new Economist magazine, Google it, and see what the elites think are some of the possibilities, or what maybe they're planning, or what they think the possibilities are of what's coming. They're sort of tipping their hand at times. And I have to think that they are this time as well.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And of course, for those that don't know, The Economist magazine is very highly, a lot of it is owned by the Rothschild family. Not 100% these days, but very much they still have a big controlling interest in it. Well, John, that has been a fascinating discussion. In fact, I think it'd be great to maybe talk to you again after the 4th of July and we see what's happening.
That'll be interesting. We'll see if how that's working. But look, people, I talked about this yesterday. We really need to remember what our values were. This tearing down of monuments, rewriting history, and that sort of thing is very significant. And so I used some examples in my update yesterday from the stones that Joshua erected when they crossed the Jordan, the standing stone that Joshua erected in Shechem. And they were all done to remind people of what God had done for them, what God had provided for them, and the standards and rules and things that God had created. And I think certainly Christians need to get back for this. And any pastors that are out there that are capitulating and bending the knee to this Antifa, Black Lives Matter agenda, you need to go find something else to do with the rest of your life, because you're not remembering the way God had set things up.
Very good point. So can you just tell the listeners where they find you again if they don't know, John?
Sure. We have a church website, fbchapel.com, for Fellowship Bible Chapel. You can also find us on YouTube at Fellowship Bible Chapel. Also, some of us have created a new website. So we're kind of separated from the YouTube censorship, throttling of views, and that type of thing. And that's called Remnant Truth Network. You can go there and subscribe. We're in the process of rolling out an app for that, and there'll be podcasts and videos there. And again, we've got things stored separately from the media giants, so we can continue in the event that they really do eventually shut us down. And that would be Remnant Truth Network, rtntv.org, rtntv.org. And that's up and running now and populated with some videos. So my update will be there. My update will be on the Fellowship Bible Chapel YouTube channel. We also we stream live on Facebook and YouTube each week when we do teachings. We also have other Bible studies and that type of thing that we post each week.
Sounds good. Excellent. Well, thank you for talking to me on the A Minute to Midnight show again, John, today. It's been another really interesting discussion, as always.
Look forward to the next time, Tony.
Cheers.
Cheers.
And folks, remember to give this a thumbs up if you're watching it on YouTube, and you can also find it on iTunes and on our website, aminutemidnight.com, where all of our shows are put in audio and video format, totally independent of other platforms. So you'll always find them there. A Minute to Midnight's run 100% by donations. If you're able to help, that's hugely appreciated. I just want to say a big thank you to the people that do donate to A Minute to Midnight. Couldn't do this without your help, and it's so much appreciated. So thanks, folks that do. The music used in the shows is written, played and recorded by me, and you can find it for free download as well on the website. So visit minutemidnight.com. That's it for this show. God bless, and all things being equal, we'll be back with another show in a few days' time, God willing.